Black librarian uncovers key to city's hidden history. Eleanor Jackson stood in the mayor's office, hands trembling as she held up the yellow document. Rain lashed against the windows, casting shifting shadows across the room's dark wood paneling. The elegant 62-year-old librarian's voice was steady despite her shaking hands. "You can't bulldoze the Westside Community Center, Mayor Collins. This deed proves the land was deeded to the black community in 1867. It was never the city's to sell to Horizon developers." Mayor Collins' face flushed crimson. He slammed his palm on the mahogany desk, the sound cracking like a gunshot. "Where did you get that? Those archives were sealed. I'm the head archivist at the Jefferson Public Library. Nothing stays hidden forever." Eleanor stepped closer, her rain-soaked cardigan dripping onto the plush carpet. "Especially not when you're trying to erase our history." The mayor's security detail moved toward her. Eleanor clutched the document to her chest, backing toward the door. "You realize what you're doing," the mayor hissed. "You're threatening a $50 million development project. Do you know how many people want this, how many jobs it creates, and how many people will lose their homes, their community center, the only piece of history that proves we built this city too?" Eleanor's voice rose. "I won't let you bury our history again." The security guard reached for the document. Eleanor turned to run, but another guard blocked the doorway. "Ms. Jackson, hand over that document right now, or I'll have you arrested for theft of city property." Eleanor glanced at the document in her hands, then at the faces surrounding her. The choice before her would change everything for her, for the community, for the entire city of Jefferson. But let's go back to how this all started. It was just 3 hours earlier when Eleanor arrived at Jefferson Public Library for what she thought would be an ordinary Tuesday. The morning air carried the crisp scent of autumn as Eleanor parked her blue Buick Century in her usual spot behind the Jefferson Public Library. The car, a 1985 model she'd maintained meticulously since buying it new, was her pride and joy, a reminder of the year she was promoted to head librarian. She smoothed her gray-streaked hair, adjusted her tortoiseshell glasses, and gathered her worn leather messenger bag. The library was a grand limestone building, built in 1921 with Carnegie funds. Eleanor had worked here for 35 years, watching the city change around this constant in her life. The morning sun caught the stained glass windows above the entrance, casting rainbow patterns on the stone steps. "Morning, Ms. Jackson," called Raymond, the elderly security guard who'd worked the morning shift since the Reagan administration. His walkie-talkie crackled at his hip. "Good morning, Raymond. Did you catch that Magnum PI rerun last night?" Eleanor smiled, remembering their conversation from yesterday. Raymond chuckled, adjusting his uniform cap over his white hair. "Wouldn't miss it. They don't make television like that anymore." Eleanor entered the library's atrium, breathing in the familiar scent of books and furniture polish. She nodded to Amara, the young reference librarian who was arranging a display of banned books. "Morning, Ms. Jackson," Amara said. "Mrs. Wilson called about those genealogy records you were helping her with, said it's urgent." "That woman thinks everything's urgent since she retired," Eleanor said with a warm laugh. "I'll call her after the staff meeting." In her office, Eleanor hung her cardigan on the back of her chair and turned on her computer. A sticky note on her monitor reminded her. "Check sub-basement boxes, Westside Records." The reminder made her frown. Last week, Mayor Collins had announced a new development project, luxury condominiums and shopping called Westside Commons, to be built where the old Westside Community Center stood. The center had been the heart of Jefferson's black community since the 1940s. Eleanor had grown up attending dance classes and community meetings there. Now approaching retirement, she volunteered on weekends teaching children to read in the same rooms where she'd learned. The mayor's announcement had stunned the community. The intercom buzzed. "Ms. Jackson, the staff meeting is starting," called Marjorie, the circulation desk manager. The morning meeting passed quickly, with discussions of budget concerns, the upcoming fall reading program, and community events. Eleanor returned to her office afterward, but found herself unable to focus on her administrative tasks. The sticky note kept catching her eye. "Check sub-basement boxes, Westside Records." Eleanor sighed and picked up her phone. "Amara, can you cover the reference desk for an extra hour? I need to look into something in the archives." The sub-basement of Jefferson Public Library held the city's historical archives. Few people besides Eleanor ventured down there. The fluorescent lights buzzed annoyingly. The air was perpetually musty, and the organization system was arcane to anyone who hadn't spent decades working with it. Eleanor rode the creaking service elevator down, using her key to access the lowest level. She flicked on the lights, which illuminated rows of metal shelving filled with acid-free boxes. Some contained materials dating back to the city's founding in 1832. Eleanor moved to Section H, Historical Property Records. She'd been researching the history of the Westside neighborhood for years as a personal project, documenting the lives of prominent black citizens who had helped build Jefferson but were largely omitted from official histories. Last week, after the mayor's announcement, she'd remembered something, a reference in an old journal to a deed or grant for the land the community center stood on. The journal had belonged to Jacob Freeman, one of the first black councilmen in Jefferson during Reconstruction. She'd read it years ago while researching her own family history, but now the information took on new urgency. Eleanor pulled out her notebook where she jotted the box numbers. H237 through H240, she murmured, moving along the shelves. Her fingers traced the labels until she found H237. Carefully, she lifted the box and carried it to the research table. For the next hour, she methodically examined fragile documents, taking photos with her phone of anything that mentioned the Westside area. In box H239, she found correspondence between city officials from 1867 discussing land distribution after the Civil War. "That's odd," Eleanor whispered to the empty room. One letter mentioned a special provision for the freedmen's settlement west of town, but the attachment it referenced was missing. She moved to box H240, which contained property maps and deeds from 1865-1870. As she carefully lifted a large folded map, a yellowed envelope slipped out and fell to the floor. Eleanor picked it up, noting it was sealed with wax that had cracked with age. The front bore a single word in faded ink: Westside. Her heart beating faster, Eleanor carefully opened the envelope. Inside was a deed dated April 17, 1867. She read it slowly, her eyes widening. "Hereby grant in perpetuity to the Freedmen's Association of Jefferson County the parcel of land designated as the Western Settlement, comprising 20 acres bordered by Maple Creek to the north, Bell Street to the east." Eleanor gasped. The description matched exactly the area where the community center stood. The deed was signed by the mayor and city council of 1867, granting the land to the newly freed enslaved people who had settled in Jefferson. "This can't be right," Eleanor whispered. "If this land was deeded to the community, how is the city selling it to developers?" She read further, finding a clause that stated the land shall remain the property of the association and its descendants in perpetuity, to be used for the betterment and advancement of the community. Eleanor's hands shook slightly as she took photos of the document. This deed proved that the Westside Community Center land had never legally belonged to the city. It had been the rightful property of the black community for over 150 years. She checked her watch, nearly noon. The library would be busy with the lunch crowd. She needed time to think about what she'd found. Carefully returning the other documents to their boxes, Eleanor placed the deed in an acid-free folder and slipped it into her messenger bag. She would make proper copies upstairs, then figure out what to do. As the elevator carried her back to the main floor, Eleanor's mind raced. The city's development plan was moving quickly. Bulldozers were scheduled to begin demolition of the community center next week. This document could change everything, but only if she acted fast. The elevator doors opened, and Eleanor nearly collided with Thomas Wells, the city's records administrator. A thin man with a perpetual frown, Thomas had never hidden his resentment that Eleanor, a black woman, had been promoted over him years ago. "Eleanor," he said stiffly, "what were you doing in the archives?" Eleanor clutched her bag closer. "Research for a patron, genealogy request." Thomas's eyes narrowed. "Anything interesting? I am the official records administrator, you know." "All archival materials should pass through my office." "Just old birth records," Eleanor said. "Nothing that concerns city administration." Thomas stepped aside, but his suspicious gaze followed her down the hall. Eleanor walked calmly until she rounded the corner, then quickened her pace to her office. Once inside, she closed the door and called her oldest friend, Margaret Williams, who had been a civil rights attorney before retiring 5 years ago. "Maggie, it's Eleanor. I need your help with something important." "Can you meet me for lunch?" he shouted over the noise. When the room finally quieted, he continued, his voice tight with controlled anger. "In light of the court's ruling, I move to table the discussion of the Westside property until legal ownership is definitively established." The motion passed unanimously. As the council moved on to other business, many community members began to file out, gathering in the plaza to celebrate the temporary victory. Eleanor remained seated, watching Mayor Collins whisper intensely to Victoria Hargrove, whose face had hardened into a mask of professional disappointment. Thomas Wells sat slumped in his chair, avoiding Eleanor's gaze. Outside, reporters from the local newspaper and television station interviewed community members. When they approached Eleanor, she hesitated, unaccustomed to the spotlight. "Ms. Jackson," called a young reporter, "how does it feel to have discovered a document that might save the Westside Community Center?" Eleanor thought carefully before answering. "I believe knowledge is power and history matters. This deed doesn't just establish who owns a piece of land, it validates the contributions that Black citizens have made to Jefferson since its earliest days. It says we belong here, we helped build this city, and our stories deserve to be remembered." As the crowd began to disperse, Eleanor felt a tap on her shoulder. She turned to find Thomas Wells standing behind her, looking uncomfortable. "Eleanor," he said quietly, "I owe you an apology. I should never have reported your research to the mayor." Eleanor studied his face. "Why did you do it, Thomas?" He looked away. "The mayor's office asked all department heads to report any research related to the Westside property. I thought I was doing my job." "Our job is to preserve history, Thomas, all of it, not just the parts that are convenient for those in power." He nodded, his expression troubled. "I know that now. For what it's worth, I'm glad you found the deed." As Thomas walked away, Reverend Jackson approached with Margaret and Councilman Harris. "This is just round one," Margaret cautioned. "The mayor and Horizon won't give up easily. They'll challenge the deed's authenticity, argue about the legal succession from the Freedmen's Association to the Foundation, and try to find technicalities. But we have truth on our side," Eleanor said firmly. "And the community," added Reverend Jackson, gesturing to the people still gathered on the plaza. Councilman Harris checked his watch. "I need to get back to the meeting. Eleanor, what you did today was remarkable. You've given us a chance to preserve not just a building, but our heritage." As Eleanor and Margaret walked back to the library, Margaret asked, "What will you do now?" Eleanor smiled. "Go back to work. I have a library to run, and there's more research to do. If this deed was hidden away, who knows what other historical treasures are waiting to be discovered." Back at Jefferson Public Library, Eleanor was surprised to find a small crowd of staff and patrons waiting to greet her with applause. Amara had decorated the front desk with a hastily made sign, "Our librarian, our hero." "I'm no hero," Eleanor protested, embarrassed by the attention. "You stood up to the mayor and a powerful corporation to save our community center," Amara said. "That's pretty heroic in my book." Eleanor spent the afternoon catching up on work and fielding calls from community members and former colleagues who had heard about the morning's events. By closing time, she was exhausted but satisfied. As she locked the library's front doors, she noticed a black SUV parked across the street, the same vehicle that had taken her to the mayor's office the day before. The driver's window lowered, and she recognized one of the mayor's security guards. A chill ran through her. Was the mayor having her watched? She straightened her shoulders and walked calmly to her car, refusing to show fear. At home, Eleanor called Michael again, this time asking if he could come for the weekend. She needed family around her, especially now that she seemed to have made powerful enemies. The next morning, Eleanor arrived at the library to find a small package on her desk. Inside was a flash drive and an anonymous note. "You might find this useful. Not everyone at City Hall agrees with the mayor." Eleanor stared at the flash drive, uncertain whether to trust it. Finally, curiosity won out. She plugged it into her computer and found dozens of emails between Mayor Collins and Victoria Hargrove, dating back nearly 2 years. The emails revealed that the mayor had been planning the Westside development long before it was publicly announced. More troublingly, they showed that he had a personal financial stake in the project. His brother-in-law was a major investor in Horizon, and the mayor himself had been promised a position on the company's board after leaving office. Eleanor's hands shook as she scrolled through the messages. This was clear evidence of corruption and conflict of interest. But who had sent it to her and why? She called Margaret immediately. "These emails could change everything," Eleanor explained after describing the contents. "But I don't know where they came from or if they're authentic." "Forward them to me," Margaret said. "I know a digital forensics expert who can verify them. In the meantime, say nothing about this to anyone." Throughout the day, Eleanor went through the motions of her work, her mind racing with possibilities. If the emails were genuine, they exposed not just a legal dispute over land ownership, but outright corruption. That evening, as Eleanor was preparing to leave, Amara knocked on her office door. "Ms. Jackson, there's someone here to see you. She says it's urgent." In the library foyer stood a young woman Eleanor recognized as Mayor Collins' assistant, the one with the sleek bob and Bluetooth earpiece. Ms. Jackson, the woman said quietly, glancing around nervously. Can we speak privately? In Eleanor's office, the assistant introduced herself as Jennifer Moore. I sent you those emails, she admitted. I've worked for Mayor Collins for 3 years. At first, I believed in his vision for the city, but when I realized he was using his position for personal gain, I couldn't stay silent. Why come to me? Eleanor asked. Jennifer twisted her hands in her lap. Because you stood up to him. Because you care about the truth, she hesitated. And because my grandmother grew up in Westside, she attended dance classes at that community center in the 1950s. Eleanor studied the young woman's face, seeing the conflict there. You're taking a huge risk. I know, but this is bigger than my job, Jennifer stood. There's more. The mayor is meeting with Horizon's lawyers tonight. They're planning to challenge the authenticity of the deed. They're going to claim it's a forgery. Eleanor felt a surge of anger. That's absurd. The document is clearly authentic. They don't care about the truth, Jennifer said sadly. They care about the development. After Jennifer left, Eleanor called an emergency meeting with Margaret, Councilman Harris, and her brother at Reverend Jackson's church. She shared what she had learned about the mayor's corruption and the plan to discredit the deed. If they're claiming forgery, they'll demand forensic testing of the document, Margaret said. That could take months, during which they might try to proceed with demolition despite the injunction. We need to go public with the emails, Councilman Harris suggested. Expose the mayor's conflict of interest. But we need to verify them first, Eleanor cautioned. And protect Jennifer Moore. She risked everything to help us. Reverend Jackson, who had been listening quietly, spoke up. This isn't just about a legal battle anymore. It's about the soul of our city. About whether we value history and community over profit. He turned to Eleanor. Sister, you started this by finding that deed, but now we need to take it further. We need to mobilize not just the Westside community, but all of Jefferson. Over the next week, events moved rapidly. Margaret's digital forensics expert confirmed the authenticity of the emails. Councilman Harris called for an ethics investigation into the mayor's conduct. The local newspaper ran a front-page story about the 1867 deed, featuring Eleanor's discovery. The community rallied around the cause. Hundreds attended a candlelight vigil at the community center, sharing stories of what the building had meant to their families over generations. Children from the center's after-school program created a mural depicting the history of Westside, from the freedmen's settlement to the present day. Eleanor found herself thrust into a public role she had never sought. She was interviewed on local television, spoke at community meetings, and guided tour of the library's archives, showing people the historical records of Jefferson's black community that had been preserved but seldom highlighted. Michael arrived from Washington, bringing his expertise as a historian to help authenticate the deed. Together, mother and son spent hours in the archives, uncovering more documents that corroborated the deed's provenance and the story of the Freedmen's Association. 9 days after Eleanor's discovery, the Jefferson Gazette published the emails revealing Mayor Collins' financial interest in the Westside development. The public outcry was immediate and fierce. Citizens packed the next council meeting, demanding the mayor's resignation. Mayor Collins denied the allegations, claiming the emails were fabricated. But when 3 council members called for a formal investigation, he abruptly announced he was taking a leave of absence for health reasons. Victoria Hargrove and Horizon developers issued a statement distancing themselves from the mayor and expressing shock at the allegations. They announced they were reevaluating the Westside Commons project in light of the community's concerns. 2 weeks after finding the deed, Eleanor sat in the community center's library room, watching children from the neighborhood select books from shelves she had helped stock with donations over the years. The threat of demolition had been postponed indefinitely while the legal questions were resolved, but she knew the battle wasn't over. A small hand tugged at her sleeve. A girl of about 8 looked up at her with curious eyes. "Are you the library lady who saved our center?" the child asked. Eleanor smiled. "I helped, but many people worked together to save it. My grandma says you found a magic paper that proved this place belongs to us." "Not magic," Eleanor corrected gently. "History, a record of a promise made long ago that we're making sure is kept today." The girl nodded solemnly. "I want to be a librarian too, so I can find important things." As the child skipped away with her books, Eleanor felt a profound sense of connection to all the librarians, archivists, and ordinary citizens who had preserved Jefferson's history before her. She wasn't just fighting for a building, but for the right of future generations to know their past. The final showdown came a month later, at a special hearing before Judge Townsend. The courtroom was packed as lawyers for the city, Horizon, and the Westside Community Foundation presented their arguments. The city's position had weakened considerably with Mayor Collins on leave and the ethics investigation ongoing. Their lawyer made a half-hearted argument about adverse possession that even he didn't seem to believe. Horizon's attorneys were more aggressive, suggesting that while the deed might be authentic, the legal succession from the Freedmen's Association to the Westside Community Foundation was unclear. Margaret, representing the foundation, systematically dismantled their arguments, presenting articles of incorporation, minutes of meetings, and contemporary newspaper accounts that established a clear line of succession. Michael testified as a historical expert, placing the deed in the context of Reconstruction-era land grants to formerly enslaved people. This deed, he explained, represents a remarkable moment in our history, a formal recognition of black citizens' right to own property and build community in the aftermath of slavery. Eleanor was the final witness, describing how she had found the deed and explaining its significance not just legally, but culturally. This document survived for over 150 years because someone understood its importance, she testified. It was carefully preserved in the city archives, waiting for the moment when it would be needed to protect the community it was created to serve. Judge Townsend's ruling came 2 days later. He confirmed the validity of the 1867 deed and recognized the Westside Community Foundation as the rightful owner of the property. "The law is clear," he wrote in his opinion. "This land was deeded to the Freedmen's Association in perpetuity, and that grant must be honored. The city's attempt to sell property it did not own is void. Furthermore, this case highlights the importance of preserving historical records and recognizing their ongoing legal significance." The courtroom erupted in cheers when the verdict was read. Eleanor hugged Margaret, then Michael, then her brother, tears streaming down her face. Outside the courthouse, community members celebrated on the steps. Someone had brought a banner reading "History Matters" that was hung across the courthouse columns. Councilman Harris approached Eleanor through the crowd. "The council voted this morning. We're establishing a city historical commission to identify and preserve significant sites in Jefferson, particularly those related to black history. We'd like you to chair it, Eleanor." Eleanor blinked in surprise. "I'm just a librarian, James," he laughed. "A librarian who changed the course of our city's history. Who better to lead this effort?" That evening, a celebration was held at the Westside Community Center. The old building's walls seemed to vibrate with music, laughter, and conversation. Children played in the gymnasium, seniors reminisced in the reading room, and families shared potluck dishes in the cafeteria. Eleanor moved through the crowds, receiving congratulations and thanks from people she had known all her life and others she was meeting for the first time. She felt both exhausted and exhilarated. As the celebration wound down, she found herself in the center's small museum room, where photographs and artifacts told the story of Westside. Michael had already begun working with community volunteers to create a new exhibit about the 1867 deed and its rediscovery. Eleanor stood before a black-and-white photograph from 1922, showing the founding members of the Westside Community Foundation on the steps of the newly established community center. Among them was a woman with Eleanor's same determined expression, her great-grandmother, Sarah. "You knew, didn't you?" Eleanor whispered to the photograph. "You knew what was in those archives. You made sure it would be there when we needed it." A voice behind her made her turn. Thomas Wells stood awkwardly in the doorway. "I resign today," he said without preamble. "Thomas, why?" he shrugged. "I've been the city records administrator for 20 years, and I never once looked beyond the surface of what was in those archives. I was so busy protecting the records that I forgot their purpose, to preserve truth, not hide it." Eleanor approached him. "What will you do now?" "I don't know, but I wanted to tell you that you were right. Our job is to preserve all of history, not just the convenient parts." He extended his hand. "You taught me that, Eleanor. Thank you." As Thomas left, Margaret joined Eleanor in the museum room. "Quite a month," Margaret said, looking at the photographs on the wall. "From librarian to community leader, what's next, running for mayor?" Eleanor laughed. "Absolutely not. I'm going back to my books." "After all this, Eleanor, you've discovered a talent for bringing people together, for fighting for what's right." "And I'll keep doing that," Eleanor promised. "But from the library, that's where I belong, Maggie." Among the stories, finding them, preserving them, sharing them. She gazed at the photographs of Westside's history, church picnics from the 1950s, civil rights meetings in the 1960s, community celebrations, and everyday moments that spanned generations. Libraries and archives aren't just about the past, she said softly. They're about the future, about making sure that everyone's story is preserved so that no one can erase them. 6 months later, Eleanor stood at the podium in the community center's auditorium, which was filled to capacity. The occasion was the official dedication of the newly renovated building, now officially owned by the Westside Community Foundation. With funds raised from donations across the city, the center had been carefully restored, its historic features preserved while updating facilities to better serve the community. The small library room had been expanded into a full branch of the Jefferson Public Library, with Eleanor's guidance. As head of the new Historical Preservation Commission, Eleanor had helped identify other sites throughout Jefferson with significance to the Black community, ensuring they would be protected from future development. The commission was also working with schools to create a more inclusive curriculum about the city's history. Mayor Collins had resigned rather than face the ethics investigation. Victoria Hargrove and Horizon had abandoned the Westside Commons project, focusing instead on redeveloping an abandoned industrial site on the city's north side, with genuine affordable housing included after pressure from the council. As Eleanor addressed the crowd, she saw faces that represented the entire span of her life: childhood friends, library colleagues, community leaders, and young people who had been inspired by the fight to save their center. 158 years ago, she began, a promise was made to the formerly enslaved people who helped build Jefferson. That promise was recorded on a deed that many of you have now seen, displayed in our new museum room. But a document is just paper and ink unless people stand up for the truth it contains. She gazed out at the community gathered before her. What happened here wasn't just about a building or a piece of land. It was about who gets to be part of our city's story. About whether we value only what's new and profitable, or whether we also cherish our heritage and the foundations on which we stand. Eleanor gestured to the renovated space around them. This center will continue to serve our community for generations to come, not as a favor granted by those in power, but as our right, a right established long ago and defended today. In the front row, Michael sat beside Margaret, both beaming with pride. Beside them was Amara, who had been inspired by Eleanor's example to pursue a degree in library science while continuing to work at Jefferson Public Library. History isn't just something that happens in the past, Eleanor concluded. We're making it every day with the choices we make and the stories we choose to preserve. As your librarian for 35 years, and now as chair of the Historical Preservation Commission, I promise you this: no one story will be erased from Jefferson's history again. The applause was thunderous, echoing off the walls of the building that had nearly been lost, but now stood as a monument to community perseverance and the power of preserving history. Later, as the celebration continued around her, Eleanor slipped away to the quiet of the new library branch. She ran her fingers along the spines of the books, many donated by community members, others purchased with grant funds. On a special shelf near the entrance sat a facsimile of the 1867 deed in a glass display case, alongside photographs and documents telling the story of its discovery and the battle to honor its promise. Beside it was a visitor's book already filled with comments from community members and visitors from across the country who had heard the story. Eleanor opened the book to a blank page and wrote, "May we always remember that history belongs to all of us and that knowledge is the strongest foundation for justice." As she closed the book, she heard footsteps behind her. A group of children from the center's after-school program entered the library, led by a young volunteer. "Ms. Jackson," one boy called out, "will you tell us the story again, about how you found the magic paper that saved our center?" Eleanor smiled. "It wasn't magic," she said, settling into a reading chair as the children gathered around. "It was history, and yes, I'll tell you the story, because stories are how we remember who we are and where we came from." As the children listened intently, Eleanor began, "It all started on what seemed like an ordinary Tuesday morning when I found a sticky note that reminded me to check some old boxes in the sub-basement of the library." Outside the windows of the Westside Community Center, the sun set over Jefferson, casting a golden light on the old buildings and new developments that made up the city. In libraries, archives, community centers, and homes throughout Jefferson, stories were being lived, shared, and preserved, each one a thread in the complex tapestry of the city's history, none forgotten, none erased. Thank you for listening. If this story touched you, please consider subscribing and share your thoughts in the comments.